Okay, guys, hey, welcome to this tactical intellectual retrieval channel. I don't want to take too much time introducing everything, but long story short, I want to introduce this Black Brute video because it's a mythical idea. We want to just fill you in on everything, the origins of that whole stereotype. It definitely pays to have the correct information on this, and once you get the right idea regarding this whole concept of the Black Brute, you'll know how childish and ridiculous this whole thing is. Because propaganda, we don't want to believe in propaganda, especially propaganda that's harmful to yourself. So let's check out this video right here, and the link to this video will be in the description. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and check it out.
So far, we covered a lot of subjects that allowed racism to be hid undercover in society, but mostly it was dependent on one caveat. That caveat was most of the stereotypes that were shown often depicted blacks subservient to whites, always seen as below them. However, one stereotype, one that is shown as the opposite, appears more often and frequent than any other, and it became one of the most non-discussed subjects of 2020. Blacks during the time of minstrel shows often depicted pickaninnies, mammies, and Uncle Toms, childlike, docile, happy-go-lucky. However, the brute stereotype created justifications to the most horrific acts. The brute was the complete opposite of the rest. They were depicted as much stronger than white counterparts, unwilling to be subservient to white culture, and relied on two key pillars, that being violence and sexuality. The way that whites viewed slavery was, if you recall the episode of Subhuman, is the idea that they tamed black humans, and if slavery was abolished, the blacks could revert back to a primitive state. The other portion of this fear was painting blacks as hypersexualized, and that all black men were designed to hunt and rape women, but mostly white women. Seeing as this is a horrific crime, it gave them enough reasoning to begin lynching. Lynching was horrific and sadistic, but rationalized that according to white Southerners, since the preservation of the white race and purity of white women were at risk, the Black Brutes were the greatest evil to eradicate. In 1965, Emmett Till visited Mississippi and allegedly referred to a white woman as baby. Days later, Till was removed from his home, beaten and mutilated to death. Years later, it was told that the woman that reported it lied about the very occurrence.
So the goal is to reestablish who you are. Now, the video is meant to give you a point of reference because, at one point, the whole way that other people viewed melanated people were the docile, super submissive group of people who were always smiling, cheesing like crazy, even if the occasion didn't even call for it. They had you programmed to be that way, that submissive to pale-skinned individuals. But then the propaganda switched when, I want to say Reconstruction, during that time when melanated people started getting their rights. Then it kind of switched to something more sinister. That's how your portrayal was. And that's that Black Brute image, especially of the melanated man. They thought he was a super hypersexual rapist who couldn't think and, was just stuck on having white girls and everything and brutalizing them. But then that just opened things up for murder by white men back in those Reconstruction days, that era. So you gotta, I'll say this, man, you have to become a strategist and a tactician from a historical standpoint and just intellectual standpoint to overcome these things. You have to know what you're looking at, and you have to remedy it. You have to have something that can overcome the distorted image that other groups of people try to put on you. It's not inherent. That's one thing you have to know. That is not an inherent trait to just be the black brute. And it's really not an inherent trait to be that docile, submissive, childlike individual. We are people. We go from child to adult. Never ever forget that. So now I want to turn my attention to this article here from the Jim Crow Museum, and it's in regards to the brute caricature. And I'm not gonna read everything verbatim, but I will highlight some important points and bring out some points that are relevant to this issue here. And now this article and the video that we just finished watching are definitely in agreement with one another, but there may be pieces of information that is in the video that we are not reading in the article. And of course, the same applies going in the other direction. There may be pieces of information found in the article that you didn't hear in the video. So that's the reason why I want to show the video and put it up against an article. Whatever you're missing here, you find it here. That's my mode of operation. Now, this belief here is very persistent, and to dismantle it, we have to identify the source of it. So let's check out the article here, and it says that the brute caricature portrays black men as innately savage, animalistic, destructive, and criminal, deserving of punishment, maybe death. Then they say that the brute is a fiend, a sociopath, and anti-social menace. So back then, they depicted the brute as hideous, terrifying predators. So they stripped the humanity from these people and just turned them into terrifying predators who target helpless victims, especially white women. So you see, an author who helped to trailblaze this image is Charles H. Smith in 1893. So he wrote in the 1890s, a bad Negro is the most horrible creature upon the earth, the most brutal and merciless. So that helps you to locate the source of it, of this long-held belief here, erroneous as it may be. So Clifton R. Breckinridge in 1900, it says he's a contemporary of Smith, said of the black race or the melanated race, when it produces a brute, man, he talking to us like we animals, man. It says when it produces a brute, he is the worst and most insatiate brute that exists in human form. And you actually have a page number 174. So then George T. Winston in 1901, he was a negrophobic writer, claimed, when a knock is heard at the door, a white woman shudders with nameless horror. The black brute is lurking in the dark, a monstrous beast crazed with lust. His ferocity is almost demoniacal. A mad bull or tiger could scarcely be more brutal. A whole community is frenzied with horror, with the blind and furious rage for vengeance. So that fact alone is something that's very important, and we can easily miss that if we're not careful. The last sentence says that a whole community is frenzied with horror, with the blind and furious rage for vengeance. And we have the page number 108 and 109. So right now I'm doing a massacre series, and this is something that you see time after time and again. So you see the print media, which is an arm of white supremacy back in those days. They always had writers or editors who would foment rage. They're profligate liars. So they claim one thing happened because a white woman was probably looked at face to face or dead in the eyes by a black man. So she screamed rape, or she got scared, and then her husband and then her police friends or whatever got involved, and they just started massacring people left and right. So that's that blind and furious rage for vengeance that happened a lot. Emmett Till, that's that story right there. And they got off with murder. So let's go ahead and move forward. Just to show you how manufactured and mythical this brute character was, check out this paragraph here, it says that during slavery, the dominant caricatures of black people, the mammy, the coon, the tom, and pickaninny, it portrayed these caricatures as childlike, ignorant, docile, groveling, and generally harmless overall. So, they use those caricatures because, it was a pragmatic and instrumental tool for slavery's proponents because, it promoted a grown adult as behaving like a child and that was in need of some white parental figure, paternalistic figure. So, black folks were portrayed as childlike, even if they were 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, they were still childlike and they needed some pale parental figure, no matter how young that pale person was. It was all about institution of slavery. So you can see how, I guess, the story switched up during Reconstruction. So we're going to check out this article talking about Reconstruction. So now, speaking of Reconstruction, it was saying in this article that the radical Reconstruction period, which was 1867 through 1877, many white writers argued that without slavery, which supposedly suppressed the animalistic tendencies of melanated people, they were reverting to criminal savagery. That word reverting, it's, well, in their mind, they're saying that that's where we are at the base. So they believe that these newly emancipated melanated people were a black peril, and that continued on to the early 1900s. So these racist writers like Thomas Nelson Page, he lamented that the slavery era, oh man, quotes, good old darkies had been replaced by the new issue melanated people born after slavery. So then here's some more harmful stereotypes that persist to our day in the 2020 whatever. He said that, okay, his description of melanated people were lazy, thriftless, intemperate, insolent, dishonest, and without the most rudimentary elements of morality. Page, who helped to popularize the images of cheerful and devoted mammies and sambos in his early books, became one of the first writers to introduce a literary black brute. So in 1898, he published Red Rock, which was a Reconstruction novel propaganda piece with a heinous figure of Moses, which was a sinister black politician. Golly, man, they don't even think when they do this stuff, man. It says Moses tried to rape. He gave a snarl of rage and sprang at her like a wild beast. He was later lynched for a terrible crime. So the terrible crime that is most often in connection with the black brute was rape, specifically the rape of white women. So the beginning of the 20th century, much of the virulent anti-black propaganda that found its way into scientific journals, local newspapers, and best-selling novels focused on the stereotype of the black rapist. The claim that black brutes were in epidemic numbers raping white women became the public rationalization for the lynching of black people. The lynchings of black people was relatively common between Reconstruction and World War II. So let's go back to the middle paragraph here, and they say that, again, at the beginning of the 20th century, most of this propaganda, it was found in scientific journals, local newspapers, and the best-selling novels, which focused on this mythical black rapist stereotype. So, I mean, that was used to rationalize lynching melanated people and massacring them. So in my massacre series, I'm definitely gonna highlight these right here, that again, the information of Okay, these people, they got to be whipped into a frenzy where they want to exact revenge, real or imagined, which 90% of it was imagined. Again, Emmett Till situation, just for context. Now, I would go out on a limb and say that this is positive for melanated people in present day because we have something to recognize patterns with. Back in those days, they used scientific journals, local newspapers, and best-selling novels. Well, we have social media in our day. In addition, with the older methods of dispensing information, and this is something that we have to use to recognize patterns with, again, because we don't want these things to happen again, because we know that these certain types of pale folks, they are prone to be whipped into a frenzy on some fictional, mythical information. And we know in present day, just like in the past, they will act out violently on something that's real or imagined. And if it's real, it wasn't even that bad. To clarify that statement, when I say it wasn't even that bad, it may be a single incident, but then they attribute it to a whole community and want to, I guess, exact revenge against that entire community. That's what I mean by that. As you will see in my massacre series, multiple videos during that time, reconstruction to the interwar period of World War II. All right, so it would help if I clarify something when it comes to the portrayals of the melanated community and the portrayals of white Europeans. Now, already it was brought out that during slavery, the dominant characters of melanated people, the mammy, the coon, the pickaninny, they were basically childlike adults who were ignorant, docile, groveling to pale folks, and really extremely harmless to those people. So the basic idea that was being pushed to everybody back then was the melanated person was in a childlike state perpetually throughout all their days. Now, the white European person was in a parental state. That's how it was. And the melanated person was harmless, which is kind of funny because there was a lot of Irish people running around. They were in gangs. Remember the movie Gangs of New York, how they portrayed all these white tribal, white rivalries and all that. Murders happened. People were assaulted. All of that stuff was going on. And it's based on some true facts, even though the movie kind of embellished a little bit. There were still rivalries that went on during those times. And again, just like that movie Sinners, the vampire was an Irish person. Irish people, they were targeting melanated people. They did lynch some melanated free folks in New York during those times. Yeah, the Irish. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward back to the article. So now we see that it says that many of the victims were ritualistically tortured. In 1904, Luther Hulbert and his wife were burned to death. They were tied to trees, of course. Funeral pyres were being prepared, and they were forced to hold their hands or hold out their hands while one finger at a time was chopped off. So we talking about a black brute, but this stuff is going on. Come on, the fingers were distributed as souvenirs. And some of the descendants of these people, they have these things to this day. The ears were cut off. Holbert was beaten severely, his skull fractured, and one of his eyes knocked out with a stick, hung by a shred from the socket. Wow. Members of the mob then speared the victims with a large corkscrew, the spirals tearing out big pieces of flesh every time it was withdrawn. Wow, and that's Holden Smith, 1996, page 1. Wow, that was so savage. But we're talking about the black brute. Okay. A mob lynching was a brutal and savage event, and it necessitated that the lynching victim be seen as equally brutal and savage. As these lynchings became more common and more brutal, so did the assassination of the black character. In 1900, Charles Carroll's The Negro, a Beast claimed that black people were more akin to apes than to human beings, and theorized that black people had been the tempters of Eve. Carroll said that mulatto brutes were the rapists and murderers of his time. Dr. William Howard, writing in the respectable journal Medicine in 1903, claimed that the attacks on defenseless white women are evidence of racial instincts in black people, and the black birthright was sexual madness and excess. Thomas Dixon's The Leopard's Spots, a 1902 novel, claimed that emancipation had transformed black people from a chattel to be bought and sold into a beast to be feared and guarded. In 1905, Dixon published his most popular novel, The Klansman. In this book, he described black people as half child, half animal, the sport of impulse, whim, and conceit, a being who, left to his will, roams at night and sleeps in the day, whose speech knows no word of love, whose passions once aroused are as the fury of the tiger. The Klansman includes a detailed and gory account of the rape of a young white virgin by a black brute. A single tiger springs, and the black claws of the beast sink into the soft white throat. After the rape, the girl and her mother both commit suicide, and the black brute is lynched by the KKK. This book served as the basis for the movie The Birth of a Nation, Griffith, in 1915, which also portrayed some black people as rapist beasts, justified the lynching of black people, and glorified the KKK. Carroll, Howard, and Dixon did not exceed the prevailing racism of the so-called progressive era. So this stuff is mythical, is lying. All these people are profligate liars. They get whipped into a frenzy and then commit the crimes that they charge towards other people. I'm doing a massacre series right now, and we did one on Memphis, and these people like to say that, all right, black men are brutish, childlike, and all that stuff, and don't have impulse control and all that stuff. But these massacre series, you see, it's the other way around. The perpetrators, they're the ones who are basically projecting what's inside of them, what their nature is, onto the victims. Because like I say, the Memphis massacre, it showed, 4 women were raped. They had their homes burned. They were looted by white folks. They were killed, all that stuff. All the things that they say that black people can't control about themselves. They don't have the impulse control. They just commit whatever comes into their mind. That was just projection on the grandest of grand scales right there. That's one thing that they outdo us. I'm gonna tell you this, and this is not being racist, but just looking at the annals of history, white folks project crazy. They have been. And then, like, in our present day, we have the descendants of these people charging the same crime to the descendants of your grandfather's grandmother's grandmother's victims. You're trying to say that the descendants of these people, they can't control themselves. Meanwhile, up in your attic, you probably got souvenirs, which are body parts, fingers, genitalia, ears, tongues of the victims of your great-grandfather, great-grandmother, and on down the line, if you didn't do it yourself. So, got a lot of nerve, man. Lots of nerve. All right, so I have to give some background information on the Dyer Bill. In 1921 and 1922, the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate, they debated the Dyer Bill, which was an anti-lynching bill. So the bill provided fines and imprisonment for persons convicted of lynching in federal courts. And then also, this was big here, fines and penalties against states, counties, and cities which failed to, actually try to protect people from being lynched by mobs. So it said that the Dyer Bill passed in the House, but was killed by the Senate. These racist Southerners who claimed that it was unconstitutional and an infringement upon states' rights. What? Now check out these statements right here. Senator James Buchanan of Texas claims that in southern states and in secret meetings of the Negro race, all right, liberals preach the damnable doctrine of social equality, which excites the criminal sensualities of the criminal element of the Negro race and directly incites the diabolical crime of rape upon the white women. Lynching follows as swift as lightning, and all the statutes of state and nation cannot stop it. So that was Holden Smith, or no, that was James Buchanan of Texas right there. So Rep. Percy Quinn of Mississippi, what a shock, Mississippi, spoke, and he said, whenever an infamous outrage is committed upon a southern white woman, the law is enforced by the neighbors of the woman who has been outraged. The colored people of the South realized the manner of that enforcement, and that is the one method by which the horrible crime of rape has been held down. Where the Negro element is in a large majority, the man who believes that the Negro race is all bad is mistaken. But you must recollect that there is an element of barbarism in the black man, and the people around where he lives recognize that fact. That's projection 101 right there. So Rep. Sisson of Mississippi said, as long as rape continues, lynching will continue. He says, for this crime and crime alone, the South has not hesitated to administer swift and certain punishment. We are going to protect our girls and women folk from these black brutes. When these black fiends keep their hands off the throats of the women of the South, then lynching will stop. So this redneck yokel Benjamin Tillman from South Carolina claimed that the Dyer Bill would eliminate the states and substitute the starry banner of the Republic, a black flag of tyrannical centralized government, blacks as the face and heart of the rapist, who recently deflowered and killed Margaret Lear, a white girl in South Carolina. So Tillman asked why anyone should care about the burning of an occasional ravisher when the House had more important concerns. So these guys are high-level projection artists. I mean, the projection is impressive right here because we know during that time, the 1900s, let's look at the simple fact that Al Capone was born in the late 1800s, 1890 something or 1880 something, I forget. But he was terrorizing Chicago like crazy. Modern day people, present day people, they gloss over that fact. They look at Al Capone and his exploits with pride, There's a sense of pride right there. Oh, he was a sophisticated gangster, I mean, there was a lot of murder that happened during that period. But the black brute image was something that was stapled onto melanated people. I don't get that. I do not get that. And then the savage nature of these people, these politicians, they talking about the crime element. Man, there was so many gangs in like Boston, New York, Philly, Jersey, of course, New Orleans, Florida had some, Chicago, Milwaukee had some gang activity, lots of murdering was happening. And then, of course, these redneck yokels in the South talking about, hey, they're deflowering our women and there's a criminal element within that community, but hey, they were lynching and ritualistically chopping up people and keeping them for souvenirs. He was lynching people. To add insult to injury, people in the crowd just shot up the victim. So you had like so many bullets in the dude and you burned them. I mean, this is wild, man. All this stuff was based off of mythological bad information. How do you go from being a docile, harmless adult to some maniacal, lust-filled rapist? I mean, that switched real quick. Slavery was this, then your portrayal was this after slavery. I mean, that was just really in its core, it's just a way to get rid of us. In the U.S., there's been a slow genocide happening. Nothing swift and quick, but more of a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Because first of all, you couldn't do a swift genocide because our people fought back. So what you got to do is implement all this propaganda and misinformation campaign, throw them in jail, hopefully they die, stop resisting type of thing, where you got one pulling you from the right, one pulling you from the left, and just for safe measure, another one pulling you from behind. And whatever way you go, hey, the fourth one going to come in and shoot you. That cop example just epitomizes our experience in this country with these folks, man. Going back to the idea of a slow genocide happening from after slavery all the way to our present day. Because like online, I see a lot of that, 13 or 15% equals either 54 or 90% when they talk about crime, violent crime to be more specific. And it's really funny because they leave out the rate of wrongful convictions. They really don't like to bring up the fact that the wrongful conviction rate is 7 times higher when it comes to us melanated folks. It's funny because when it comes to this crime topic, I can't help but to think of the Tupac Ed Gordon BET interview from years back. And I know the vast majority of melanated people in this country feel the same way that Tupac does. And it's a little dated, but it's the sentiment that counts. So check this clip out.
We live in the gutter. We got us stacked up 80 deep in one building. By the time you get out your house, you strapped to protect yourself. Because you living in the same community that the police is carrying rifles and riot gear. It's the same reasons they need the riot hat, the riot jacket, the flak jacket, the double vest, the 9mm Glocks with extra bullets, the tear gas, the mace, all that. Who do you think the police is using that against? So we fighting the same villains that they fight in the street. But instead of them seeing us fighting villains in the street, we all villains. And the main thing for us to remember is that the same crime element that white people are scared of, black people are scared of. The same crime element that white people fear, we fear. So we defend ourselves from the same crime element that they scared of. You know what I'm saying? While they waiting for legislation to pass and everything, we next door to the killer. We next door to him, because we up in the projects where it's 80 in the building. All them killers that they letting out, they right there in that building. But it's better, just because we black, we get along with the killers or something? We get along with the rapists because we black and we from the same hood? What is that? We need protection too.
For emphasis sake, I definitely need to replay this clip right here and drive the point home.
And the main thing for us to remember is that the same crime element that white people are scared of, black people are scared of. The same crime element that white people fear, we fear. So we defend ourselves from the same crime element that they scared of. But it's better, just because we black, we get along with the killers or something? We get along with the rapists because we black and we from the same hood? What is that? We need protection too.
So to put into context what Tupac Shakur was talking about, he was referring to and speaking on the inner city crime element where you have sellouts and coons preying on their own community right there. Now, I doubt that I will be jumping to any conclusions when I can say that 99.99% of melanated people will definitely agree with Tupac Shakur when he said the same crime element that white people fear, melanated or black people fear. He put emphasis on it by repeating it. And if you don't happen to fear them, I know that you have to be wary or cautious around crime elements like that. Now, speaking of melanated folk and their interaction with crime elements, the crime element isn't just within our own community that we have to be wary or cautious of. There is, and there always has been, a larger, more blatant crime element that we have to worry about. I mean, there are sundown towns for a reason, and it's a lot more than you think. Here's what I am getting at right here. The idea of the black brute was fabricated. It was contrived. It's not natural in any way, as we have seen. Now, there's a brute out here that is basically natural. Oh, snap. Hey guys, you gotta forgive me. That's a very elementary way of expressing myself right there. I mean to say, there's a brute that is genuinely a brute, and he's not black, as you will see and are seeing right now. Reconsideration is the order of the day, for real. Now, I'm drawing close to the end of this video presentation here, but let me close out by playing this video clip here. And you guys can match the necessary ideas together and see the whole concept of the black brute for what it really is. Oh, and I haven't said it yet, but thanks for tuning in to this presentation, and I'll catch you guys later. All right, check this video clip out.
One of the things in warfare, you try to denigrate the enemy. You remember in Rwanda, they talked about the enemy as cockroaches. Do you remember that? To try and make it that if you killed them, it wasn't an issue. You're just, where's the aerosol can? You're just spraying cockroaches. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what I do remember as a child is that they produced horror books. So you would get a publication of 10 or 15 pages, quite big, with nothing but atrocities of people that have been chopped up by the Mau Mau. So people, heads cut off, animals, legs cut off, children murdered in their beds, and this was thrown at us.